This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Starting off the show is Oklahoma State University livestock economist Derrell Peel with a cattle market update where he notes what has added to uncertainty and if the fundamentals are still holding strong. Paul Blodgett, operations manager of the Hal Ross Flour Mill, continues the show as he explains what makes the mill unique for the industry and students wanting to learn more. K-State wildlife specialist Drew Ricketts concludes the show as he details what he sees as hunting plots and what plants he recommends for them. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Monday show with a cattle market update from Oklahoma State University livestock economist Derrell Peel. Derrell, thanks for joining us today.
You bet. Great to be here.
Derrell, as we look at the cattle market, what are we seeing overall?
You know, it's been kind of a rough summer for cattle markets and beef markets a little bit. July, we saw a fairly serious correction in the market, and I'm going to call it that because I think that's what it is. Compounded by the summer doldrums, hot weather makes it hard on markets, and we're still struggling a bit with that. And so, the markets are trying to put together a little bit of recovery here, but it's been a challenge between the continuing summer conditions that we've got, as well as some additional headline impacts the last, couple weeks. So all of that makes it a challenge, but the markets are still fundamentally very sound.
And taking a look at boxed beef, a lot of times we talk about grilling season being from Memorial Day to Labor Day, and we're getting closer to Labor Day. So are you seeing any movement in boxed beef?
Yeah, we saw, boxed beef prices did drop through July, and some people link that to the broader market correction that was going on, but really it was mostly just a seasonal move. In fact, the prices really laid right on top of where we were this time last year. They declined through July. They've already bottomed, and they're trying to rebuild. And we typically see that about mid-August, we start seeing some wholesale buying for that last Labor Day summer holiday. And so that's kicking in. We actually had a pretty nice rally this last week in boxed beef prices. And so, so that one's pretty much just kind of normal seasonal move. As we go beyond that, towards the end of the year, boxed beef prices often are a little bit lower in the fourth quarter. But we've got also declining beef production and beef supplies, so that may help prop up these markets towards the end of the year.
Do we ever see any little spikes for boxed beef when we get around, say, Thanksgiving or Christmas, that holiday season?
We see it for certain products. And so even though the overall boxed beef, if you look at a price index and averaged over several years, it tends to be a little bit lower in the fourth quarter. But within that, if you look at tenderloins and ribeyes, our two most valuable beef products, actually have very strong seasonal demand in the fourth quarter of the year. The problem is they're a relatively small percentage of the total weight of the carcass. And so with the seasonal decline in some of the end meats and all that, the overall boxed beef index tends to go down a little bit. In a stable market, it would at least.
And while we're talking about the cattle market, wanting to mention some plants that are making some changes, whether they're closing or being sold, and what have we seen in the recent news?
Yeah, so this past week, we got additional news on top of what we've already seen the last few months with beef packing infrastructure adjustments. Tyson made an announcement this last week that they were going to cease slaughter and fab operations at their Joslin, Illinois plant, and that they would also be closing a further processing plant in Utah. And then they also announced that their Pasco, Washington plant is for sale. My understanding is that it's going to continue operating for now, but they've made the announcement that they would be interested in anybody that would like to buy that potentially. And the other thing they said was that, Amarillo's been on one shift for several months now, the Amarillo Tyson plant. And they've announced that as they expect eventually to see cattle supplies rebuild a little bit, perhaps they're thinking ahead to the Mexican border reopening, that they will resume a second shift there. And so the net impact on overall slaughter capacity is probably not very big. With an additional shift in Amarillo, will just about offset that Joslin, Illinois plant.
You mentioned that in the past few months, we've heard a lot about plants making changes. Is this something we've ever seen before?
Not like this that I can recall. I mean, we have had occasional plant closings over a lot of years, usually pretty sporadic. But to see the number of adjustments we've had. So we had Tyson close the Lexington, Nebraska plant. Recently, JBS announced that they would close or at least stop fabrication, slaughter and fab operations at the Souderton, Pennsylvania plant, and now with the Joslin, Illinois plant closing. And so we've not seen this level of adjustments that I can recall for probably ever.
And looking a few years in the future, if our cattle herd does get rebuilt up, do those things ever come back online? Or what's your opinion?
That's an interesting question because, obviously the plants are struggling right now with the limited cattle supplies. That's why we're seeing these adjustments. And that sets up the idea that someday with rebuilding cattle numbers and production in the industry that we could miss that capacity, bump up against a smaller capacity constraint. And so, yeah, I think it's possible that at some point in the future, we'll see the other problem when you have a lack of capacity. Right now we have excess capacity. So it's definitely a possibility. And the more of these adjustments that we see, we may not be done yet, the more likely that is at some point in the future.
And how has the border reopening, which is happening next week, added some more volatility to our market?
The initial volatility was when USDA made the announcement at the end of July that they were going to start the process of opening the border. And so that added, additional pressure to the summer correction. The reality is when the border opens, they're going to start in northwest Mexico in Sonora. And it'll be limited numbers initially that will come across. So even though it's part of the process. So, it's initially, the numbers will not be that big. In fact, I don't think we'll get that many cattle even by the end of the year. But if we start that process slowly, we'll see cattle trickle in. They may move after that. They did not give a timeline, but they did indicate that if everything goes well with the initial opening in late August here, that in a few weeks or at some point they might open the border crossings in New Mexico at Santa Teresa and Columbus. And so, again, it's a staggered process. It'll be a slow process. And so it doesn't change the overall numbers very fast, but over time, it suggests we might get back to something kind of like what we've seen in the past.
Another aspect that's adding a bit of volatility to the cattle market, weather conditions, which have been impacting pasture conditions, and how are things looking and how are producers feeling in your neck of the woods, Derrell?
I tell you, we've had a very long run of very high temperatures in Oklahoma, lack of rain, and it's forecast to continue for the foreseeable future here. And so we've seen a dramatic turnaround. Our pasture conditions are going backwards very rapidly. In fact, if you look at the national drought map, drought conditions are rebuilding in many regions and overall for the whole country. So I think we're kind of going backwards. Now it is summertime, so we sort of expect hot, dry weather to some extent, but it's been pretty severe lately, and it's there's some question about as we go forward how much impact that we might have.
So how does really the combination of the border reopening, not ideal drought conditions, and a few plants closing really all come together for the cattle market? How does it make sense?
Yeah. The main thing it does is it just adds uncertainty. All of these things create uncertainty and volatility in the markets, and that's a very real impact that we're, continuing to wrestle with and probably will for the foreseeable future. In the grand scheme of things, some of these are kind of in process, so we have to wait and see how they evolve. I don't think the Mexican border opening is a major market factor ultimately. And as we grow back into it, probably, certainly not before sometime next year, mid to late next year, maybe we see significant numbers. The other issues, kind of the same deal. We have to wait and see how things play out a little bit, but mostly it's just the fact that there's so much dynamics in the market right now, so many things moving and so much uncertainty about what else is yet to happen that I think it's kind of keeping the market off balance a little bit.
Are there any things happening in the market that are still certain and staying with those fundamentals?
Underneath all of this stuff we're talking about is the fact that the fundamentals have not changed. We still have extremely tight cattle supplies. They're still getting tighter at this point. The mid-year cattle report told us that we had a smaller calf crop again in 2026. The beef cow herd was down again on July 1. So, we're still trying to find some stability in these inventory numbers. We're going to continue to see tighter feeder cattle supplies as we go into 2027. And in fact, we're still looking for really strong indications that we're beginning heifer retention in any significant way. There are some minor indications that we're thinking about doing it, but when you look at drought conditions and other things, it's not clear, or it does suggest probably that we're not seeing very aggressive movement in that for the time being.
Could we potentially be seeing a little bit of that heifer retention and herd rebuilding, but the weather conditions make us backpedal?
It's entirely possible. I think drought conditions early in the year probably, sort of prevented some plans that maybe producers were thinking about. Now we're going backwards. In some regions, at least, there will be a question of whether producers can follow through with any plans that they might have at this point. So it's it's going to keep it on a very slow, kind of cautious pace, I think, for the foreseeable future.
Derrell, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
You bet. Happy to be here.
That was Oklahoma State University livestock economist Derrell Peel. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking about the Hal Ross Flour Mill here at Kansas State University with Hal Ross Flour Mill Operations Manager Paul Blodgett. Paul, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Paul, what is this Hal Ross Flour Mill?
So the Hal Ross Flour Mill is really a one-of-a-kind building anywhere in the world. It is a flour mill dedicated for teaching purposes, right? So out in the milling industry is fairly small. If you go to one of the big companies, whether that's an Ardent or an ADM and want to do testing or something like that, right? They are busy making product for customers and they're not interested in shutting their mill down for that purpose, right? So that's kind of our niche. Our niche is to educate students. That's our primary goal, to educate the undergraduates. We also do research activities, both with grad students and with industry work.
As you've watched those students come through the mill, what has it been like to see them interact?
So it's really cool having them at the mill, right? It's a giant hands-on training tool is what it is. Even though it's its own building on campus, we always joke that we are one of the best kept secrets in Manhattan, right? A lot of people don't know that we have a flour mill here. But it's exciting because the students, what they see at the Hal Ross Flour Mill is the same equipment they see out in the industry. So it really gives the students a leg up when they get out there because they have already known about a sifter or a roller mill or all this different cleaning and milling equipment.
And what do you think when you think about the mill is one portion that maybe the general public doesn't think about when it comes to flour mills?
It's a lot of responsibility, right? It's basically the food service industry, right? It's such a grand scale that a lot of people don't understand. When I was out in the industry, I worked in a Durham mill where we were making semolina for pasta, and we would make 1 million pounds of semolina in one day, right? So if you feed 4 people off a pound of pasta, right, we would feed 4 million people in one day. So I always try to impress that, especially on the incoming students or the high school age students. I say, what did you do today? Well, I can say that today, I help feed 4 million people, and we're going to do that tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. So it becomes this huge economy of scale, if you will, that you're touching so many people. And in this case, whether it's it's pasta or bread. It's going on in the industry all over.
And as you're thinking about feeding maybe those 4 million people, are you guys doing research to help improve how that happens?
Yep, that's kind of the role of Hal Ross, like I talked about with the research side. So if the companies want to come to us, let's say they have a new high fiber wheat, right, that they're growing. How do I test that before I roll that up and I start, rolling that out as a new variety or a new seed? We do a lot of testing like that. I also mill the Wheat Quality Council samples and utilize students to assist me with that. So we're milling these different varieties of wheat, passing that milling information and the flour information on so they can do research on that and try to figure out which varieties they're trying to advance.
Do you have students working with you year round?
Yes, typically I'm the only full-time employee in the building, but I utilize students to help me do all the things we need to do. And I have several during the semesters as their free time between classes allows. They help me. And then typically I'll have one student in the summertime. So it's kind of like a little mini internship for the students and get some good exposure to what's going on in the industry before they actually get out there and see it themselves.
How in the flour mill do you guys keep evolving to stay up with the industry and keep supporting food service?
Right. So we are very well connected with the industry. We are the only place you can get a 4-year degree in milling science anywhere in the world, essentially other than China. So when we talk about the milling industry, I always tell people who's out there, it's all K-Staters, right? So if they have a research project or trying to advance something, who do they come back to? They come back to K-State, right? We're the knowledgeable, we're the experts in the field. So.
What is it like then being the operations manager of the flour mill here at K-State and seeing people want to come back and do research and work with you guys?
It's exciting, right? It's the people that want to come back and then do the research, these companies, right? Is typically people that I've worked with in the past, whether it's former students, people I've worked for. We like to think of it, it's very close, tight-knit networking in the flour milling or in the grain processing industry.
And as you mentioned, milling science really exclusive to K-State in the USA. And so do you often see students coming in to want to go directly to milling science, or do you see them kind of evolve and pick out milling science into their college education?
That's been one of our challenges is getting the student numbers up, right? As I said, we're kind of that closely guarded secret. Even a lot of people in Manhattan don't know that we have a flour mill. So we're trying to get the word out. We have a lot of we get a lot of good ag students, right, coming in. A lot of the rural students or kids, if you would call them that, right, learn about us typically through word of mouth or from a friend or something like that. And that's how they kind of get started down that milling path.
As you look forward for your sector of the industry, what do you hope you get to see?
I just hope the industry continues to advance, right? Compared to where we were 50 or 100 years ago, we are really advancing on the technology side. The mill, while we like to think of the mill as being new here at K-State, it was built in 2005, 2006, so it's now 20 years old. But we continue to advance the technology within the mill. Companies are very good about supporting our operations here, whether that's through donations of grain or equipment or different technology. So that technology continues to evolve with the help of the industry. The industry recognizes us as being the one to give them the answers that they need.
What is the coolest piece of technology you have or you get to interact with?
So we have a color sorter or an optical sorter. So if we have let's say we have some wheat come in, maybe we have some heat damage or some darkened kernels. We need to separate. We separate out the chaff. We separate out all the dust, everything like that. But a piece of wheat that is damaged like that is very difficult to separate. The color sorter allows us to look at each kernel that we process and make a color determination. And we have the ability to reject those kernels out of the clean wheat stream. So very cool technology. It's used in a lot of other things, whether that's plastics, pharmaceuticals, things like that. But for the wheat industry, it's really exciting to be able to run the wheat through that before we process it.
What do you do then with the rejected kernels?
They go into the screening stream, and then they get mixed in with the wheat bran.
Paul, what's your favorite part of working at the Hal Ross Flour Mill or being involved in this sector of the industry?
The interaction with the students, right? It's always exciting for me. I spent a lot of years out in the industry, so it's exciting to see those students and work with them, and all of a sudden you can tell in their face, right? The light clicks on that. Wow, I understand that now, or I understand, like we talked previously about the economies of scale, and I have this responsibility, or how does this machine actually work, or anything like that, right? It's the teaching phase, it's the learning phase that really is exciting.
If people are wanting to find out more information, how can they do that?
So if they go online, they can look under Grains.edu, right, at K-State, and you can find us there. We are part of the Grain and Food Science Department, and underneath that is milling, feed, and baking. So we have all three disciplines there, and food science. So we have all those disciplines there.
Do you ever give out tours of the mill?
We do. We give a lot of tours. We give a lot of tours to groups, to FFA groups, school groups. We go down even as far as if you're a prospective student or have an interest in milling, we are more than happy to give a tour, whether that's with your family or anything like that. So we are very open. We like showing off what we have, try to get the word out there about milling science.
Paul, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Well, thank you very much.
That was Kansas State University Operations Manager of the Hal Ross Flour Mill, Paul Blodgett. If you're wanting to find out more information about the Hal Ross Flour Mill or just K-State's Department of Grain and Food Science, you can do so by going to Grains.k-state.edu. Once again, that is Grains.k-state.edu. If you're wanting to search just for more about the Hal Ross Flour Mill in general, you can just search it on the internet, Hal Ross Flour Mill K-State, and it should pull up. I will put links in our show notes on agtoday.net to both of these resources. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but when we come back, we'll be joined by K-State wildlife specialist Drew Ricketts as he discusses the difference between hunting plots and food plots and what his recommendations are for plant species. We're now cutting to that short break. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Monday show discussing hunting plots with K-State wildlife specialist Drew Ricketts. Drew, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Shelby.
Drew, why are we calling these hunting plots and not food plots?
When we think about the use of food plots throughout North America, there are parts of the country where white-tailed deer and other species may be food limited. And oftentimes that food limitation is because we're trying to produce more critters than the environment can actually support. But it can also be due to things like very drastic changes in weather conditions from year to year. Here in Kansas and throughout much of the Great Plains, we've got really fertile soils and tend to have abundant natural food in most situations. And that natural food can also be supplemented by the row crops that we might have in a commercial agriculture situation. So that's why I usually refer to these as hunting plots rather than food plots, because really the purpose here is to concentrate animal activity rather than because the critter actually needs the food to be provided.
For these hunting plots, what crop or food choices do you have that are maybe really popular but might not be a recommendation?
one of the groups of plants that folks often hear about and like to plant is a brassica. So this is a plant that's in the broccoli family. The common plants that we see in food plots might be turnips, some kind of radish, rape, or canola would be another name for that plant. Kale. Those are all plants that deer oftentimes select in the right situation, but in areas with acidic soils, we can see that sulfur can be really high in the natural food that's available that deer are including in their diet. And those brassicas actually accumulate sulfur. And if deer are already ingesting a lot of sulfur from the natural foods that are available, they might avoid those brassicas. So I think it's really important to think about, what are our soil conditions and what are we seeing in terms of deer selecting a plant or not selecting a plant in the area before we make those kind of choices.
What would you be recommending?
Some plants that deer always select and that are really tolerant of a wide variety of soil conditions and that I've seen work well around the state of Kansas. Forage oats are a really good option. Really, any cereal grain is going to work well. Wheat, rye, oats, triticale. But oats tends to be the species that's selected the most. And so even if we have a lot of wheat available on the landscape, oats are going to be selected by deer. And when we're planting those oats, it's important to look for a forage oat that is also a good variety for our area. And Jerry oats tends to be the variety that works well throughout Kansas. It's also very tolerant of cold. And so if we plant those Jerry oats in August or early September, we're going to be providing green forage throughout the fall and winter hunting seasons when we really want deer to be focusing on those. Another plant that works really well, it's good to supplement those cereal grains with a legume, and Austrian winter peas are a very hardy plant. They're another plant that's really tolerant of a lot of different conditions. Ideally, we would get those peas in the ground in September, even up to early October, rather than August. And an easy way to accomplish that is to get our oats established either by broadcasting or drilling, and then we can broadcast those winter peas into the growing oats. I've also done some playing around with those winter peas because I've seen how hardy they are by broadcasting them into fescue or brome grass that's been hayed and doing that broadcasting right before a rain comes. And then those peas will go ahead and germinate. They'll grow up above that grass that's been harvested as a hay crop, and they can provide a nice little food plot opportunity in an area. And they're also, because they're a legume, they're fixing nitrogen and supplementing the nitrogen in that area as well.
Drew, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Shelby. It's always fun.
That was K-State Wildlife Specialist Drew Ricketts. That's what we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.